I am Rachel Lynn Solomon, and I am joining you from my home in Seattle, which is also where the book takes place. And I write both YA and romance, and Today, Tonight, Tomorrow is my third published book. And I am so thrilled that it was selected for the Barnes & Noble YA Book Club. And I'm also extremely excited to be chatting about it today with Gloria Chao, because not only are we friends and often early readers for each other, but our first books actually came out from the same publisher with the same editor almost 3 years ago. And now I will turn things over to her so she can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gloria Chao. I'm the author of American Panda, Our Wayward Fate, and the upcoming Rent a Boyfriend, which is going to be out November 10th. This book follows a college student who hires a professional fake boyfriend from a company called Rent for Your Rents to try to appease her traditional Taiwanese parents. This is inspired by a real-life practice done in many Asian countries. And I'm so excited to be here today because I can gush about Rachel's amazing book, Today, Tonight, Tomorrow. And I'm so excited we're finally doing an event together because, as she said, we've been friends for a long time. We've been lucky enough to be at the same, bigger events, but we've never actually been on a panel together or got to do a discussion.
Yeah, I know. There are all these silver linings of the pandemic, and this is definitely one of those. So yeah, I'm very glad that we're able to do this. And for everyone who hasn't read American Panda or Our Wayward Fate, both of those are wonderful. And Rent a Boyfriend, which comes out in November, as Gloria said, is my favorite of her books so far. So definitely be sure to grab that one when it's out. But for today, just for everyone joining us, this will be a spoiler-free discussion because I know some of you have read the book and some haven't. So I did want to give just a brief description of what it's about before we dive into some questions. And if you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments and we will be taking some of those later. So Today, Tonight, Tomorrow is an enemies to lovers romantic comedy that takes place over 24 hours on the last day of senior year. And the main character is Rowan, who has always been at odds with Neil, her academic rival, for all of high school. And on this last day of school, when he wins valedictorian over her, she has one more chance to beat him. And that is a senior class game called Howl that takes them all over the city of Seattle. It sort of serves as a way for them to say goodbye since it's their last day of school. And when they learn some of their classmates are out to get them, they are forced to team up, which leads to a lot of discoveries about themselves and about each other. And the main one being that maybe they don't actually hate each other that much after all.
Which is amazing. I devoured this book. I was kind of in a reading slump just because when the world is falling apart, I feel like it's hard to devote your attention to anything. But reading Today, Tonight, Tomorrow just brought me so much joy. I love Rachel's book so much. I mean, she has this beautiful writing style that is both funny, but also so beautiful and touching and lyrical. And Today, Tonight, Tomorrow had all of those things. And it was also such a page turner. I had to know what was going to happen next. And it was just such pure joy. So I really hope you guys can read it who haven't read it and also kind of experience just happiness in a time where it's a little bit hard to find. So I was hoping, of course, I loved it so much. I was hoping we could kick this off by talking about what inspired this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first time I started thinking about writing a book like this with a shortened timeline was actually about 7 years ago, which for a lot of people who are writing and putting out a book a year, to have thought about a book that long ago is, it feels like a very long time ago. I mean, I don't even know what was happening in the world then. But it was around that time that I saw the movie Before Sunrise, which is about two strangers who meet on a train in Europe. And they get off together in Vienna, and then they spend the day exploring the city and falling in love. And I was just really captivated by the idea of telling a love story in a single day that relied mainly on dialogue and the chemistry of the two characters. But plot has always been kind of a struggle for me, so I couldn't really come up with one, so I put that idea away for a little while. And then in 2017, just a few years ago, I watched the movie Dazed and Confused for the first time. And what's interesting is both of these movies were directed by Richard Linklater, who is also known for Boyhood more recently. And what I loved about Dazed and Confused is how it captured the atmosphere of the last day of senior year. So my initial idea right after I saw that movie was I wanted to write an updated YA version of Dazed and Confused with the kind of love story from Before Sunrise. Except I wanted the main characters to be longtime rivals because enemies to lovers has always been my favorite trope, and I had wanted to put that in a book for a while.
And it was done so well. One thing that really impressed me was you gave a really fresh take on the enemies to lovers trope. And you managed to do it in 24 hours, which I feel like is very difficult to have such a big arc happen in such a short time. So I'd love to know, can you tell us a little bit about how you wrote such a compelling enemies to lover arc in just 24 hours? And if you have any tips, or what were you thinking about when you wrote it?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. So a huge part of it was figuring out Rowan and Neil's past and how much of that I wanted to put on the page. And this was actually something my editor, or our editor, and I discussed during the editing process, which was having a clear event in their past that turned them against each other. And what that became was this essay contest that they entered in 9th grade, beginning of high school. It was about which book had impacted you the most. And Rowan wrote about a romance novel, and Neil picked The Great Gatsby, and he won. And then he made her feel terrible for picking a romance novel. So both of them are very bookish, and they just love words and literature. So there's this really fundamental disagreement that they have about literature, except it's not just literature to Rowan, because she wants to write romance novels. So the ways that he's insulted her over the years just really get at the core of her being, and just kind of twist the knife even more when they're competing in all these various things. So I knew pretty early on that, well, first of all, I have to redeem this character who on page 2 is dragging her for liking romance novels. But what Rowan doesn't know is that Neil read that book that she wrote about at some point during the past 4 years, and that he genuinely liked it. So he keeps tormenting her about this thing that she thinks he thinks is garbage, but he doesn't actually feel that way. So in addition to them discovering, that they have really gotten each other completely wrong over the past 4 years, the other thing that was really fun to play around with is changing the way that Rowan gradually perceives Neil throughout the book. So she starts out, incredibly annoyed by him, even just the smallest things like his glasses being askew, or he wears a suit, and just it's so infuriating that he wears a suit to an assembly. It's because it's Neil, it's infuriating to her. But she fixates on these little parts of his appearance, and because she doesn't really know yet how she feels about him. And, if you are fixating on these pieces of someone's appearance that you think you hate, there's probably something deeper there, right?
Yeah.
So the more time that they spend together, really getting to know each other on an emotional level, they realize all these things they have in common. One of the big things is that they're both Jewish, which Rowan didn't know about him, and that connects them on this deep level. And they're talking about their fears and their pasts and, their plans for their future, and they just really get each other. And then in addition to the emotional is the physical, which I find really fun to write because you just turn a very simple touch, or just something like an arm brushing someone's shoulder, like you turn that into this giant moment, and make your character really obsess about it. And you put them in more and more, you put them in closer and closer proximity, just more and more and more, until she is suffering with how much she realizes she likes him. And that is, to me, that is like the joy of enemies to lovers, is making that switch and the journey to get there.
Yeah, it was done so well where even when she's supposedly, the enemy and hating him in the beginning, like you said, she's fixating on him so much, and you have her friends, you use her friends very well. They kind of tease her about it, and they say like, oh, you're always talking about him, and they kind of already have picked up first. So it was done so well where even when they're hating, you already kind of are starting to see the things that are, it's moving toward the lovers part of it
Right.
later on. And I also love, so you mentioned using like the essay competition and having that be the defining moment. You had this great section in between the chapters where it was, a list of their history and kind of all the things that, starting with the essay contest, and then all the things that they've done to kind of one up each other. And you had all these really brilliant snippets in between all the sections, and they were all different things. There was the history, there were journal entries, emails, game updates, and I thought that was a really brilliant way to kind of break out of the 24-hour structure and show us more of the past. And I thought it just worked so beautifully. And I wanted to know, is this something that you always had from the beginning? Is it you had to, write those to kind of figure out their past and you ended up weaving it in? Or, how did those come to be?
Yeah, thank you. So pretty early on, I realized I didn't want to include massive flashbacks because I didn't want to slow down the main story. Somehow the book still wound up being 90,000 words, which is exactly the same length as my first two books, which both took place over an entire year. So,
that's so fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, I think I just have a brand, and my brand is writing books that are 87,000 words exactly. But yeah, so I didn't want flashbacks, but I really wanted the book to feel like a full picture of not just this last day, but of their whole rivalry. So the very first the first little scrapbook element that I wrote was a list that's just like a brief history of their rivalry. And it was sort of my way of cheating and not writing a flashback, because it really is a flashback, but it's just in a slightly more fun format. And I enjoyed writing that so much that I included a couple other lists. And then I just kept getting ideas for other pieces of material that might have come up over the history of their rivalry or on this last day. So there are emails, there are notes, chats, a school incident report from when they started a fire in the chemistry lab. One of my favorite ones is a note that is wedged between the windshield wipers of Rowan's car that just tells her she did a terrible parking job. I just think they serve to make this day feel fuller, these little pieces of ephemera. And the publisher did such a beautiful job with the design. The book just really feels like a scrapbook of the last day of school. So I couldn't be happier with how it turned out.
And you already touched on this briefly, but I really loved how you made Rowan's character a passionate romance novelist. And I really related to her arc of kind of learning to become comfortable with that. And, at the beginning, she's not even telling the most important people in her life that she's a writer. And, I remember I struggled with that even after I switched careers. It took me a very long time to tell people. It almost felt like I wasn't a writer unless I hit certain milestones. And so I thought you tackled that really well. I was especially struck by your acknowledgement section where you talked about how your younger self was actually more like Neil, where you romance books before. And so I'd love to talk a little bit more about, your journey, how you felt before, what changed your mind, what do they mean to you now, and why you decided to bring them into such a huge part of Today, Tonight, Tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that question because I think just in general, writing a romantic comedy gives you this like very comfortable framework to explore all these other issues. And this one came up like really organically, but I'm happy that it did. So a lot of the romance novel discourse and a lot of Neil's character is based on my own experience. Not entirely with romance novels, but that was definitely a big part of it. For me, it was actually kind of a mix of romance novels, YA, other media interests that I had as a teen that I often hid from other people because I felt like they weren't cool or socially acceptable, or, I was watching like kids shows as a teen and I felt like I was too old for them. Or I was reading Meg Cabot and Sophie Kinsella, but I was telling everyone my favorite book was Catcher in the Rye, when it didn't bring me nearly as much joy as The Princess Diaries did, because I wanted to be perceived as like an intellectual. I wanted to be perceived as like this very serious person. And it even got to a point where I started to look down on romance novels and other media geared toward women and teens. And a lot of that is, romance, YA, reality shows, certain bands, boy bands in particular, and just a variety of other things, because when you're seeing so many people do it and act disparaging towards something, you think that you're supposed to also. So it's just, just bandwagoning, really. And for YA, it took me a while to come back to it. I did not read it as a teen. I really started to look down on it even. And wasn't until after college that I started reading it again, and I was just blown away by how many amazing books and amazing stories that I had missed out on. And then for romance, it wasn't until a few years ago that I started re-immersing myself in it, which just makes me a little sad to think about, because none of those things are hurting anyone, and they really exist primarily to put joy out into the world and to make people happy. So Rowan's arc was really about finding the courage to embrace what she loves without shame, which she does through eventually, telling Neil that she's writing a romance novel and showing him part of it, and then even reading from it at an open mic. So it is a very accelerated character arc over these 24 hours. And I definitely wish I could have experienced something like that as a teen. But yeah, I really loved being able to write that in YA, because it was a theme that I could have used as a teen.
It was beautifully done. I think readers are really going to connect with that.
Thank you.
And really love that. So I know writing hasn't been the easiest thing to do for the past few months. I mean, most things haven't been easy to do. And sometimes, it's even harder when you're writing about something that's so different than what's going on in the world. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about, why is it important to make sure that we keep writing books like this, romance novels, and we've already touched upon this, but, they do bring so much joy to the reader. And so can you just talk a little bit more about kind of what the past few months have been like for you? And are you still trying to write romance books? Has the pandemic changed anything?
Yeah, well, so back when everything first started, and Seattle was really one of the first places that started shutting down. So pretty early on in March and then into April, I had some moments, and like longer than moments even, where I felt like, why does this book matter? Like, I was working on another rom-com and I was like, why does this book matter either? Like, it almost felt frivolous to be spending time doing it when everything else was so chaotic and like so dire. But being able to escape into writing these joyful books, and especially now that Today, Tonight, Tomorrow is out, and hearing from people that this book just like enabled them to forget about everything for a while, and not to the point of ignorance, but just everyone needs a break. Like, no one can watch the news cycle 24/7, or even, like, I have really tried to limit myself to just looking at certain times of day, because like the constant influx is so challenging, and so it harms all of our productivity and all of our mental health. So to just be able to bring happiness to someone for the amount of time that they're spending in the book is like really the best thing that I've felt as an author so far. Like, I think we all write so that people will experience some emotion, and like knowing that I could make something that created that positive emotion for someone is, to me, that feels like very important and very meaningful. And it also goes back, I think, to what I was saying before about why people look down on these things that bring joy. And I think this was something that I felt as a teen, but like there's this terrible assumption that something needs to be serious or dark or have a white man at the forefront in order to have value, but that's just not true. And what I feel I have had to learn is that a book's value, or really the value of any piece of art or any piece of media, is what it means to you, the reader, the viewer, the consumer. And this book has just really taught me the kinds of stories that I want to put out into the world. I feel like I'm almost getting emotional about it, because like some of the messages that I've received about this book have just like completely frozen me in my chair, because they have been so, like, I didn't anticipate it landing at a time where people would need this kind of joy.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite messages, or are we going to get too emotional?
No, well, one of my favorite things is hearing from teens who were not able to have the kind of graduation that they wanted to. And I really had no idea, this is a YA novel, so teens are obviously my primary audience. Those are who I'm thinking about when I'm writing. But hearing from teens who were 2020 grads who were able to experience some of that through the book was just like, I was just so grateful and so honored to have been like some small piece of their like graduation experience, even in this messed up world right now.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on to talking about the setting of the book. So all of your books take place in Seattle, but Today, Tonight, Tomorrow especially felt like a love letter to the city. And I felt like the setting was so vivid and it really added a lot to the story. And for readers who haven't checked out Rachel's social media recently, she has a lot of wonderful pictures of, the book and every single place that all the big scenes took place in. And so it's a character for every single reader, but I imagine that it's even more special to someone who is from there. And so I was just wondering, have you heard any reactions from readers about that? Have any local readers reached out to you and said anything?
Yeah, I have really loved hearing from people in Seattle. One person reached out to me on Instagram recently and said she had listened to the audiobook while driving around. And I just thought that was a really cool way to
That's
experience it
cool.
because, when you can't actually go out and do the things that they are doing in the book. But I've also heard from people who now they want to visit Seattle or people who used to live here and they really miss it. And this book was able to bring them back. And so I really loved that.
Oh, that's such a great compliment.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite scene from the book? Was it a specific Seattle place that something took place in, or was it the bench, which I assume isn't a specific bench, but is just a bench, which is a big part of the book. No spoilers.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, the bench scene definitely is up there as one of my favorites. I think it is tied with, there are two scenes that take place at libraries. And I realized that during the revision process. And I was like, should I have two scenes that take place at two different libraries? And then I realized both characters are sort of, book nerds. So it was okay. But I mean, I was just so blown away when I got this cover because it shows them all on the bench. And the bench is just really a pivotal scene. So I loved that. I also really like the scene that takes place at the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle because the characters go into the nocturnal house that used to be part of the zoo and sadly no longer is. But I like that I was able to capture it.
You do such a great job of capturing that feeling of graduating high school and, both that fear and excitement of moving on to unknown things. I had a pretty miserable time in high school, so I don't really relate to the fear of it. I was just so excited to be getting out of there. But it was actually really nice to experience, a different side of it through Rowan, and she had a lot of just little internal thoughts throughout that I really love. Things like, how they were all a unit and they all knew how funny it was that the one character dressed up as a carrot, and you have all these inside jokes with people who you spent 4 years with. And so I'm just curious, how much of your own experience did you draw from for capturing that in between and that leaving high school?
Yeah, I definitely had a rough time in high school too. So in a way, this was sort of like, not wish fulfillment, but I feel like I was kind of rewriting part of my high school experience. I mean, honestly, I was scared of everything. And even now I feel like I'm scared of most things and just carry around quite a bit of anxiety. So a lot of that is drawn from experience. And also, I just never felt like my real self in high school because I was still, just hiding so much. But at the same time, I was still very worried that whatever was going to come next, college or whatever else someone is going to do after high school, I was worried that maybe that wouldn't be better. So it was definitely a, just anxiety on top of anxiety. But I think I was afraid really to leave high school and still be the same person. I was very shy, very awkward. I didn't have strong friendships. I live 25 minutes from where I grew up, and I don't talk to anyone from high school, even though, they're here. It's just, I feel like I hid so much of myself that I wasn't able to make strong friendships. So I think, I feel like I tapped into some of that fear, but it was definitely a different angle.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us a little bit about the transition that you made with Today, Tonight, Tomorrow? All of your books definitely have a lot of humor and levity, but the focus has shifted in this one into a much more rom-com, a much happier overall feel. And so I'm just curious, do you have a book idea and you flesh it out regardless of what it is, or do you feel like you kind of have to stay on a certain career trajectory?
Yeah, so I sort of touched on this earlier, but I really feel like this book is kind of a turning point for me. My first two books, You'll Miss Me When I'm Gone and Our Year of Maybe, were heavier, and they will always be really important to me because I feel like they helped me work through some difficult stuff. But I also wrote 4 books before my debut that didn't get published, and all of those were heavy too. So I feel like with this one, it kind of goes back to, how I used to think that these lighter, more joyful books didn't have as much value, but like I just had the best time writing this one, and it really challenged me as a writer, like writing something that took place in such a shortened timeline and writing this trope that has always been my favorite thing. So I think I just want to keep chasing those feelings of excitement and getting to experience or getting to experiment and explore in the romantic comedy space, while still giving my characters happy endings.
Mm-hmm. I've always thought it was kind of a fascinating topic to talk about, author brands, because I feel like to a certain extent, if you're the one writing it, there's something that's always going to be similar throughout all the books, even if the subjects change a lot. But at the same time, a lot of authors in the publishing industry really do make you feel like you have to stick to a certain amount sometimes. I think we've been lucky because our publisher has supported, branching out, but that's not always the case. And so I'm just curious, when you're writing, how much do you focus on writing the best book, for that book? And do you ever think about the bigger picture? Do you think about the market? Do you think about, how people are going to react to it?
Yeah, that is a really great question. I do think about both because at a certain point, writing moves from becoming just a hobby, and now it really feels like both an art and a business for me. But at the end of the day, whatever I'm passionate about is going to carry the most weight for me. I think anytime someone tries to write to the market or write to a trend, first of all, it takes 2 years to put out a YA novel usually. So in 2 years, the landscape is going to look completely different. So you also spend so much time with your book. Like, you are going to spend months writing it. You're going to spend even more months editing and revising, and then you're going to spend all that time promoting. And if it's not something that you're passionate about, that's going to be a drag. So that passion has to come first. So, I can say for now that I want to keep writing romantic comedies, and hopefully I think those feel like on brand. But I think if I ever wanted to deviate, I would follow that desire wherever it led me.
So I'd love to know if you have read any recent YA books that you love that you want to recommend to all the readers listening.
Yes. So one of my favorites from this year was What I Like About You by Marissa Cantor. If anyone is looking for a similar, fun, upbeat rom-com, this one is about mistaken identities, and it features a main character who is a YA book blogger. And also the main characters in that book are Jewish, as they are in Today, Tonight, Tomorrow. So I think those 2 books really would be good friends. And another one that I really love that just came out a couple weeks ago is Now That I've Found You by Christina Forrest, which is about a girl who is an aspiring actress, and her grandma who's a Hollywood legend, and it was just a lot of fun. Do you have any recommendations, Gloria?
Some of my favorite contemporary authors are, I love all of Rachel's books. I love Julian Winter's books. He just had another book that just released this week, 2 days ago, called The Summer of Everything, that I really love, which is also a very feel-good book. It's about teens that are trying to save their local indie bookstore. I am a fan of I'll Be the One by Lila Lee, which is about a main character who wants to be the first plus-size K-pop star, which was just so much fun. And a couple other authors I love are Stephanie Kate Strom and Samira Ahmed. So we're going to jump to reader questions really soon. So if you have any, please go ahead and put them in the comment section. And then just the last question before we jump to reader questions is, Rachel, I'd love to know what is coming up next for you.
Yeah, so it is kind of serendipitous that Rowan wants to be a romance author, because the first my next book, the first book that I have coming out after Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, is my first romance novel, and I honestly could not have worked out better even if we planned it, and we did not plan it. But that book is The X Talk, and it is coming out in January, and it is a romantic comedy set in the world of public radio. And then I have another YA romantic comedy coming out next summer, and it is about a teen wedding harpist. And it just deals with a lot of wedding hijinks, and that was a lot of fun as well.
So I have a random question for you. I love that in Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, you talk about a romance, Rowan's favorite romance author, and she wants to make her book event that night during the course of the 24 hours of the book. And the romance author has a stamp that is made of her lips. And so when she stamps, it looks like she's kissed the book. Are you going to do something like that for your romance books?
Oh my God, I hadn't thought of it. I wanted to just make her like very extra, I guess. But I also sort of love that idea. So I don't know if I don't know if it would be creepy to have that in a book.
I thought it was cute. When I read it, it really stuck in my mind, and I remembered it. And my first thought was, oh, is Rachel going to do this?
Now I wonder if anyone has actually done that. I am sure there's a romance author out there who has done that.
It's a good idea. All right, so we're going to move on to some reader questions. Margarita would love to know, the cover is so cute and screams romance. Oh my God, the cover is so good. Did you have any influence on the design of the cover? Which is a great question.
For this one, no. So actually, I think the cover process it has been really different for me every time. And this one, it showed up in my inbox one day. It showed up exactly as you're seeing it right now, and I just immediately loved it. The designer is Laura X, and the illustrator is Laura Brayling. She's in Germany, and her art is really cool. You can find her on Instagram. But I just love the way that she captured the characters, just the little details, and of course the bench is very symbolic. But what I love the most about this cover is it completely tells the whole story of the book. It uses the title and just the gradual of them coming together on the bench. I love it so much. So I couldn't be happier with it. I had no input, but it turned out perfectly.
Jody would like to know, this book was amazing. I loved it so much. How do you come up with characters?
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. So sometimes I come up with a premise first, and sometimes I come up with a character. Usually if I come up with a premise first, I'm trying to find a character who would just have the most at stake in that story, or who would just be suffering the most. I feel like half of being an author is just figuring out different ways to torture fictional people. So I think definitely a lot of them have pieces of me in them. So like Rowan really loves new wave music, which I was a huge fan of in high school. I will often give them like fashion choices that I am fond of. But honestly, I spend a lot of time trying to dig deep with, I was talking about what they might have at stake. I really try to figure out like what the main character's fear is before I, get too deep into the book. And then I try to figure out how they will have to confront that over the course of the book, because that is what's really going to be at the core of their emotional journey. And then with Neil, I really just try to come up with someone who would be deeply annoying to Rowan. And I also wanted to make him just a very non-stereotypical romance hero. He's very much a beta male, like not at all an alpha. And I think that's a bit rare to see, definitely rare to see in romance in general and in YA too. So I just had a lot of fun with just trying to make him as like traditionally unappealing as possible. They're the same height. He has red hair, as do I, but I think like it's a bit harder for a ginger guy. They just are teased quite often. And, of course she is like deeply in love with him, but he is not like the traditional romance hero.
Wendy would like to know, is this being made into a movie? It would make a great movie, which I agree with her on.
Oh, well, thank you. It's so interesting to hear that because, you know, my two major sources of inspiration were movies. And I actually, last year when I saw the movie Booksmart, if you haven't seen that yet, I really recommend it because it has so much in common with this book. But I was just like blown away because I was like, oh my God, this is so much of what I imagine this book would be. So all I can say is that I would definitely love for it to be made into a movie as well. And, you know, if anything ever happens that I'm able to talk about publicly, I will be shouting it as loud as I can.
Okay, Pammers172 would like to know, do you have any resources for writing prompts or exercises to get your creative flow going?
That's a good question. So I have not used a ton of writing prompts personally, but one thing that I really like in terms of character development, because I think when a lot of people think about writing, you think about plot. But maybe this is just because some of my books are quite light on plot, and you know the characters I think really carry them, and that's what I love to read more than books that are really plot heavy. I think doing character work is one of the best exercises, and my favorite book for that is Story Genius by Lisa Cron. And that book just talks a lot about how a lot of the time when you outline, it takes away from like your character's journey, which should really be the emotional core of the book. So that is something that I highly recommend to anyone working on a book right now.
I'm a fan of that one too.
It's a good one.
Kay West would like to know, why did you have Rowan make a success list?
Oh, so this is actually something that was added a bit later in the process as well. It was based on a similar list that I had in one of my high school journals, all of which I still have in storage.
Oh, wow.
I should get one of those out and get a photo of it with Rowan's list. But the bit about her like perfect high school boyfriend is almost verbatim taken from my old journal. And I think it just really speaks to, at least the reason that I had her do it was I wanted to show that she just has this very clear idea of how she thinks she wants her life to go and what she thinks she should have accomplished by, 18, which is obviously so young. She still has so much she can do, and have it contrast with where she is right now. So it was a bit of, a tool, like a device to get her to have those, deep thoughts and to torture her, of course. But yeah, it was also kind of fun for me to go look back at my list and be like, perfect boyfriend must be a vegetarian, because I definitely wrote that.
That is so fun. You should get it out.
I will. I think I will.
Okay, Kelsey. Hi, Kelsey. Would like to know, readers know Neil's favorite words, but what's one of your favorite words?
Oh, no. Oh, gosh. Okay, this is going to put me on the spot. I really like short, punchy words. One of my favorite, I like words that sound like what they are. I'm sure there's a word for that. But I really love the word, I'm just thinking about it because I wrote it into my current project yesterday, but I love the word shard, like a shard of glass, because I think it just sounds like exactly what it is. And I feel like this will go up to be like Rachel's favorite word, shard. But, I can't think of anything quite as nearly as complex as Neil's favorite words right now. But I do like Sundoku, which is one of his favorites, which is acquiring more books than you could ever read, which I imagine all of us can relate to.
I did love that about Neil, that he had those. Kay West would like to know, I like how Neil is going to school to become a how do you pronounce that? Lexicographer. Why did you choose that for his profession?
Yeah, so I had a lot of fun. Another thing that goes into my character work is I try to figure out not just their passions and what they want to do when they are older, but they all have a very specific taste in music and taste in clothes and all of that. And so for Neil, he was actually I originally had him want to be an interpreter. But because there's so much talk about words and their meanings, I thought that a lexicographer, which is someone who puts together dictionaries, and I did not know what that meant either. I found it during research. I thought that was just a little more interesting, and it felt like it really suited him, just someone who would spend his days poring over dictionaries. And I also really love the moment where Rowan like takes his phone and he has all these dictionary apps like on his main page. It felt very Neil, and I just liked giving him this very specific interest.
It worked well. It said a lot about him quickly. Yanissa would like to know, how did you come up with the game Howl?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So Howl was a bit of a headache at times. I had all these maps that I made that looked like, like a conspiracy theory type map with all the like yarn and all of that, because I wanted to figure out like how to move them around the city. But it was inspired by, in college, my whole school, 40,000 people. I mean, definitely not all of them, but they played a campus-wide game of humans versus zombies. And you start out with like one zombie, and then like the zombies will go around and pull people's bandanas, and then those people turn into zombies. And it's eventually like, will the humans or will the zombies win? And I had a friend who was very into it. And I remember following him around campus as he was like trying to find these, secret passages through the school and just these other ways of getting around and trying to get out of class really fast to avoid a zombie. And even though I wasn't playing, I thought it was just very fun. And then I just wanted, so that, and then combined with the scavenger hunt, I wanted this way to like physically move the characters around the city. And it felt like just a very, it felt like something fun that a school might do as a traditional kind of send off for their seniors. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Today, Tonight, Tomorrow is available at your local Barnes & Noble, and almost all stores in Washington State have signed copies. And it is also available 24/7 on bn.com. And I just wanted to show you all of the copies have this adorable little blue bench under the cover, which, as you know, plays a significant role in the book. And I was just so excited. It was a total surprise to me when I saw the finished copies. But yeah, thank you so much for all the great questions. And you can pre-order Gloria's upcoming book, Rent a Boyfriend, which will be out November 10th. Gloria, thank you for joining me, and thank you to everyone for tuning in and for asking those great questions. And huge thank you to Barnes & Noble for this opportunity and for selecting Today, Tonight, Tomorrow for their book club. All of this has been a really amazing experience, and it has definitely made, obviously a fraught time to release a book, but it has made this deeply memorable. So I'm